Cool. Okay, now we're actually recording. So, what I was saying, right? So there's this idea of the courtesy of Pixar from the VFX industry that we can represent materials with a sort of shared shader rather than needing to make a unique shader every single time. And you can drive like the appearance of something with that shader with a series of textures. This didn't matter at all for game development until like post Unreal Engine 3, post like Unity 4. When with Unity 5 and Unreal Engine 4, they were like, hey, all our artists like working this way. Why don't we make our game engines implement the exact same shader? A big part of that was also, computers finally being fast enough to make that happen. This continues to be more and more relevant as like offline renders, like the renders that they use for movies, continue to be closer and closer to the renderers you actually see in game engines, which is super, super cool. Thank you, RTX on real-time ray tracing, things like that. But you guys don't care about VFX. We just make video games. So the reason this matters, and Godot actually also uses PBR, courtesy of the people who use Godot. And the reason why this matters, this matters on your own games, right? If you're trying to make a game that like looks good and you need to make some materials, this can matter. But if you're joining AAA, you really need to be familiar with this workflow, even if you are not planning on being an artist. Just so that the artists like will thank you for actually understanding their process. This workflow is like every single major AAA studio uses this, even the smaller studios like your double A's and your Dishonored teams and things like that. Recently, we've seen sort of a resurgence of this in solo dev, where the idea, right, is you can purchase a bunch of your assets. There's tons of great free assets on the Unity asset store. Most of those are going to be using a PBR workflow. So that's great. You get, all your environment props, stuff like that. But you still need to make like a gun or something based on like what you want your game to actually be. If you don't like match their standard, then matching art style is one thing, but simply just matching the same standard that all the other materials and the assets are using. If you don't match that, then your prop's going to stick out like a sore thumb. You can most recently see this in Inscription, where the majority of the props were just PBR assets that they had just taken and purchased from websites like Sketchfab, and they made the rest of like the key props that were actually important to the game, like the miniatures and the actual characters like Leshy and stuff. So learn to do it right, because if you don't, then it just cheapens like how your entire game looks. So the other kind of important thing, right? If you've attempted to download Substance Painter, you might see like 45 different things called Substance. People like to use the term Substance to refer to like any of these tools, which is the worst because you have no idea what anyone's talking about. But Substance Painter is the one we're learning today, and that's the one for painting textures. Substance Designer allows you to create materials, which you'll see how you can use those in Substance Painter. You can also use those directly in game engines. We have a really decent video tutorial from a few semesters ago that you can find on the TigerDev YouTube channel covering how to use Substance Designer. Substance Stager is not really as relevant for game dev. It's just for rendering out your models very quickly. Substance Sampler is a little bit relevant for game dev, where you can take pictures of like real textures in the real world and then auto generate like normal maps and height maps and roughness maps from those. And Substance Modeler comes out in like 2 weeks, and it's a sculpting tool. Anyway, why do I care about Substance Painter? The biggest reason is like making the textures for a 3D object in a 2D workspace is actually crazy. You're constantly, you're exporting your stuff from Photoshop. You're looking at it in Unity. You're like, does this look right? If it looks wrong, you're changing like 2 pixels and then you're exporting it again. That's crazy. Like that makes no sense. It also discourages reuse of your texture because you're making your textures that are like hyper specific for what you're actually working on. And obviously because like your UV maps and stuff are not going to be the same from model to model, you can't reuse any of that. So please stop doing that. If you don't want to use Substance Painter, there are other 3D painting tools like Armor Paint and stuff that I think Armor Paint's open source. There are some cheaper options as well. I just strongly encourage using like a 3D tool, please. So I said, right, there's this standard that drives the shader. Like what are the parts of this? It's every PBR texture is driven with a roughness map, a metallic map, a normal map. The other ones are like the implementation varies from engine to engine. You guys are probably familiar with normal maps and stuff like that by now. But they're pretty easy to explain. So a metallic map, everything in the real world is either dielectric or it's not. So like actual metal, like a piece of steel, that is going to be like actual like raw metal. So for a metallic map, it would be completely white, whereas something like a piece of plastic, of course, is going to be dielectric. In general, if you're not sure, it's probably dielectric. I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory, like what is metal and what is not. In this example, there's paint covering metal, right? So the paint is black on the metallic map because the paint is dielectric, but the actual metal underneath the paint is white because it is metal. So height and normal maps, these convey the same sort of information. They're adding fake depth to your models. I'll show you in a second in Substance and how you can actually paint these details on. You have probably seen this in your favorite AAA games. When you're walking and there's like all these little greeblings on a wall or something like that, that wall is actually flat. That is a flat polygon. They have just baked a normal map on top of it to give it depth. And we like that because as game devs, we are terrified of polygons. Roughness. So there's this nice little chart that helps you visualize it. Roughness looks different based on if your material is dielectric or not, but it's basically a nice way to say how shiny something is. Unity is weird and quirky, and they use smoothness instead of roughness. And that is literally just as simple as inverting your roughness. So the values are going to be the exact same. They just have decided that 0 is the roughest value and 1 is the smoothest for some reason. So how do we actually do this? First, I want to show a quick example if the Wi-Fi will play nice. So what does this look like on an actual model, like once you've actually applied it? You see this right here, like this is a really nice looking model with some really detailed textures, and you're going to be able to see some of the things I was talking about. So like these details, right? These height details, that is all in the normal map. Those are flat. So that's like an actual smooth polygon that is completely faking the depth. Similarly, like the the metallic bits on this, that one's easy, right? That's just a metallic map, either white or black. Roughness is a little bit more interesting, and it's actually what's giving this like frog dude, his scaly texture, especially compared to the bird where the feathers are going to be a little less rough. So you can really just eyeball all of this when you're actually painting, but it's a really good idea to understand, how these things actually look, because it can really bring like a model to life. If you don't have, if you like this looks pretty lame, right? With all the normal details turned off. Okay. Well, the next slide just says that we can actually open Substance Painter. So we're going to do that. So I sent out in the art channel a sample file that we're going to be using. It's a low poly version of a mesh and a high poly version of a mesh. So to get started, all you do is you go to File, New. We are going to work with the Unity HD render pipeline because at the end of this, I'm going to take the materials and actually show you how to set them up in Unity. But the materials that you're making for Unity can also be used for Unreal, Blender, whatever. You'll just have to change when you actually export them. You'll just pick a different preset. You can also make your own presets if you need to for some reason. So you pick your template, you go to select, and from the thing I downloaded, we have the low poly and the high poly version. So you can see like the low poly version, I think it's like 300 tries. I actually have it here in Blender. It's super, literally 390 tries. So super low detail, which we like. We like low polygons in our game engines. And then the high poly one we're going to bake is about 1,200,000 polygons, which would bring any game engine to its knees. So part of the benefit of this workflow is we can actually take the detail from the high poly one and bake it on the low poly one, because this looks kind of rough. I know we love the Tiger Dev logo, but like the normals and the edges are kind of lacking a little bit. So I took this mesh and I was kind of going for like a clayish handmade thing, just kind of scribbling on it for a little bit. So all I did right here is you go over to texture set settings, bake mesh maps, and you select your high poly mesh, You pick the resolution you want. We'll do something like low, so it won't take forever. I like to turn on anti-aliasing because it can help cover up like mismatches in between your low poly and your high poly mesh. And then because we only have like one thing, I don't think you actually have to change the low poly and the high poly mesh suffix. But if you're doing, if you have everything in like one file or something like that, then it's important to actually define these so that it knows which one to actually use for the bake. And then we hit the magic button, we wait a little bit. And this is actually going to bake all of the information onto the mesh that we're going to use for our material. Most importantly, this is also going to bake a normal map for us. So we're going to get the small height variations of the 1 million polygon, 100,000, or whatever, numbers are hard. The big polygon mesh. And you can immediately see, it's kind of subtle a little bit, but you can see that we have all those little height details on our mesh that we didn't have before. The edges are now smoothed instead of having the harsh edges that we have before. But most importantly, the poly count is the exact same. This mesh is still 300 triangles, even though it looks almost identical to the mesh that's 1 million triangles. You can apply this to anything you're working on, as long as the silhouette of the low poly mesh matches the high poly mesh. Okay, this is all great. This is all cool, but like we're here to paint textures. So we're going to paint textures. So over here, you have different layers. You have the paintbrush icon, which is just a paint layer. And if you click that, you can scroll down over here and you can see what you're actually painting with. Let me make this slightly bigger. So you can pick the color that you're painting with, which is like plain white right now. And like, that's cool. But we talked about like PBR is a bunch of different textures. PBR is more than just a base color. It's more than just like one channel. We also need to be painting our roughness and our metallic maps. So the benefit of using Substance Painter is we can actually do this at the same time. If you're doing this part in Photoshop, you would need to be making each of your maps. And I'd rather die. So over here, you can pick roughness, and you can pick the roughness that you're painting with, and we'll put it to 0 so that we can really understand what I'm talking about. And we'll put metallic to 1. And you see the previews changing to show what that's actually going to look like. And lo and behold, if we start painting, ooh, super shiny. Really cool. It's chrome. It's the future. So if you have a really simple thing in mind, I mean, you can literally just scribble on your mesh and you can start getting that. You're already going to see like, this is what we would assume a metal object would look like. And if you plop it in Unity or whatever, you're going to see like the same thing, but part of it is metallic and the other part of it is not. That's just kind of to illustrate how, we can also adjust height, which is really cool. So this is actually going to paint on the normal channel for us. And then we can get like some fake height going on. And if you get really, really close, it's super obvious that it's flat. But most of the time when we're working on props, you're looking at stuff from like over here. You might be looking at stuff from way over here, and you can't tell that the height is faked. If we pan the light around, you can really kind of see what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's how paint layers work. But we're mostly programmers here. We don't want to sit here painting all day. That takes forever. Screw that. I don't want to do that. So we can pick the big, the paint bucket icon over here. And just like the paint layer, this gives us parameters to adjust, but this is going to adjust them for the whole mesh. So, we can pick our base color, we can pick our height. Changing the height is not going to visibly make a difference because height is going to be entirely derived from like variance. So if everything is a height of 1, you're not going to be able to see that at all because normal maps exist and like differences between height. We can go ahead and set that to like 0.2 or whatever. I don't want this one. We'll do like something like this. Okay, cool, great. But I don't want my TigerDev logo to be entirely white. What if I want the top parts to be blue? So with fill layers, you can add, you can click, you can either right click or you can click this little magic wand icon over here. sorry, the thing next to the magic wand icon. And if you've ever worked with a photo editing program before, you're probably familiar with the idea of masks. This is pretty simple. A black mask means everything's going to be blocked out. A white mask means that nothing is going to be blocked out. So we'll put a white mask on there. And then we want to say, all right, so what about the top parts? We don't want those to be black. So we can click the little magic wand and we can add a sub layer to the mask. And this works just like having like a separate fill layer, but it's only going to apply to the changes on that layer rather than to the entire mesh. In this case, because we have the mask selected, because we've clicked the mask, it's only going to be doing it there. So we can click that and then we can paint. Since it's set to black, the parts of the mesh that are black are going to be the parts of the mesh that that aren't going to be affected by the fill layer anymore. So I can sit here and I can do this, and now that part of it is not black anymore. Because these are actually separate like mesh components, you can go to the polygon fill tool over here, and you can select either parts of your mesh by UV chunk. You can see the UV map for the mesh over here. It's pretty simple. Or you can select by like 3D, like geometric mesh parts that are separate. So because there's like actual space and these vertices aren't connected, we can just select, we'll put it to black, and we can just select all of these meshes. Bam, really easy. So now our fill layer is only going to be impacting the bottom part. And then if we take a new fill layer and we put it underneath, then we can have that fill layer change the top part of the logo. So we don't have to spend all day scribbling on things. What's up?
Can you do like a rectangle select? Like, you know, like in Photoshop, where you can select an area to paint inside it, you can do that like with polygons.
Yes. So it's going to select entire polygons when you do that. Here, we'll go back to our little thing. So they have that, and you can either select by quads or tris. And what it's going to do, I should put it on white, is it's going to select the entire polygon that you have selected. So you can also like click individual ones, right? So, you know, it's going to work like a lasso select tool, but it's not going to be doing that like within polygons. It's going to be doing it for the whole polygon. So if you have like the actual part of the controller over here that's super hard to see. I should not have picked red. You can see like the wireframe, it has like a little bit more geometry to work with. You can get more like results that make more sense using the lasso tool. This also is something you should think about a little bit when you're actually working with your geometry. In that if you want something to be separate, it's probably a good idea to like go ahead and put an edge loop. That way you don't have to paint to get the exact area you want. You can just click the magic button and drag over the stuff that you want to have selected. Okay, so we showed how sublayers worked on masks, but I said that you could also apply sublayers to the other side of the material, the actual layer itself. So if we go to like our blue layer, we can add a sublayer. There's a bunch of different ones. A paint layer is going to pretty much do what you think. It's like having a paint. It's just like the other paint layer, but it's only going to apply to what's actually being covered by the fill layer. But the other kinds that are a little bit more powerful, we'll show how levels work in a second. There's a filter layer, and you can apply a bunch of different built-in filters, or you can write your own for the different channels on your map. The most helpful ones are they have these material finish layers that can make your material kind of resemble a little more closely like something in the real world. I'm sure zoom compression is making these subtle differences impossible to look at. So we'll do like perforated circles because that should be kind of obvious. So the perforated, that's on the normal channel, so it's going to be overridden by the top. You can see in this case, it's just taking all of the data that we have and making circles on it. A lot of them that are more useful. This is like a nice galvanized one. You can also reuse this to do like a painterly kind of effect. And you can see that's actually applying on all the channels. So as I move the light around, you can really see how the differences in roughness matter. This is what's going to help give like, you know, a scene in your game a lot of depth. If you have like a laser or something like some sort of moving light, it's really going to bring these materials to life. Similarly, if you have some sort of moving light and your materials are all uniform on the roughness and on the normals, then it's going to look kind of boring. It's just kind of going to look like a light flying through. Okay, so that is filters. Mask filters. Okay, another really common thing, right? What if I want to slap, I put hectic Hector in our distributed lesson plan for a reason. What if I think the TigerDev logo needs like a big old Hector on it? So I can just drag that JPEG in, set it to import as a texture. We'll put it in on the current session. Cool. Now I have that Hector. We're going to make his own fill layer. And we're going to put him in base color channel. That's pretty big. It's a little too big. I can't tell that that's Hector anymore. So this is where the UV half of Substance Painter kind of comes in handy. For something that's flat like this, it might make sense to, that's terrifying, be able to kind of drag and project the material where you want it. Now, we don't want 45 hectares, we just want 1. So we can set UV wrap to none, and suddenly I can actually tell what's happening. So if you have decals and stuff, this is one way to apply them. There's another way to apply them, which is really helpful when you're working on like a map or something. And that is you can apply it as an actual projection. So with like a planar projection, it's going to give us an image plane that we define where we want it to be, kind of like a decal tool in like Unreal, or I don't actually know if Unity has a decal tool. I think Hector's sideways. Someone help him. Okay, he is very sideways. We're going to type in numbers because numbers are less scary than clicking things. It's okay, Hector's all right. So you can see the planar tool is actually really useful in this case because we can define the depth that we want the plane to be. Like if we move it here, we just have him kind of on the top. He's still a little big. Poor Hector. I hate this. But you could also, if for some weird reason you wanted him to kind of bleed into the sides of the model, you have that power. Bam. $4.99 at your local GameStop. Okay, so you can kind of see if you're working, I think a lot of times you need to put like logos and stuff. You need to put like help text on a wall. You need like a big old arrow because your players keep missing like where the door is for some reason. Your textures can actually very easily like guide your gameplay. And like, sure, you can just take an image plane and just kind of put it on the wall. And sometimes that might make sense. But I mean, if you're doing something like a CSGO map where you just have posters littering the wall, things like that, it's helpful to be able to kind of organize them. And you can do all of the extra fun little things that we just said that you could do on other layers on this one. So we only have hectic Hector in the color map, so we're going to turn the others off. But if we do like, oh, that's gonna, my computer hates that. If we want a nice oily Hector, we can apply a filter to the base map. We could apply any filter, but you can kind of see how it can be powerful to start layering these things on top of each other. Another little trick is if you need to generate stuff from another map, there is a gradient tool, and you can, I'm mixed up on my tools. I want the information from that map onto the roughness. Well, I guess an easier way of doing that would be simply dragging Hector onto our roughness map. And because there's an RGB value associated with that, we suddenly have different levels of roughness. Now, Hector's eyes should be glossy and his skin should be rough because we're applying human logic to pixel art now. So another little tool you have is like a levels tool, which is just like your standard Photoshop GIMP adjustment layer. You will probably find yourself using this a lot to kind of hone in on things. But in this case, we just want to invert it. I'm realizing his eyes are opposite colors, so this is not really helping us. But we can kind of hone in on what we may or may not want the texture to actually look like. This is a terrible example image. Cool. Layers for you. We are going to get rid of that and pretend that that never happened. What else? Sublayers. Okay, there's one other sort of super helpful trick for when you're starting to build data. So these have all been really, really simple textures, like one color or the other, but everything in real life like doesn't look like that. I mean, like look at the wood grain on the table that you're sitting in front of. There's a lot of like micro details. So a really easy way that I like to start layering those details on is I create a new mask map, add a new fill to it, and you have all of these textures built in that are pretty freaking helpful. And you can start layering these textures on top of each other to resemble the thing that you're trying to create. So we're gonna try and give it that nice, like, you know, like someone hands you like their Hori gamepad controller and there's like gamer gunk on it. We're gonna add that. If we search for grunge, I think smudge soft is like probably closest to like the gamer gunk look that we're going for. So we can add that, and that's like, okay. But the same trick that we used earlier, right? There's different types of projection. A really nice automatic one. You're gonna see with the UV projection one, partially just because of how I unwrapped it, you actually have a seam right here. And if your players are like really obnoxious, they're going to be like, why is there a UV seam? An easy fix to that is a TriPlanar projection. And this is just going to apply the texture from multiple different angles, kind of ignoring the UV map. And this is a life hack. If you are like a beginner 3D artist and your UV maps aren't great, you can totally just compensate for that in the texture. So we're going to slap a TriPlanar projection on that. The scale's way off, so we're going to change that from like 1 to like, I think like 4 looks pretty good. And that's like all right, but like that's a bit much. Like that's such a gunky controller. I wouldn't want to touch it. We're going to turn it down like a tiny bit, and we're going to do that by taking another layer, and we're going to blend the two layers together. So let's see what's screaming to me right now. I guess that works. Right, so now that's replacing the layer. That's not what we want. We want to multiply the two together. A lot of different programs have blend modes. If you've used like the shader graph in Unity, that has blend modes. If you've used Photoshop, GIMP, they have blend modes. It's literally the exact same implementation here. So the multiply mode is going to work the exact same as it does in those programs, where it's going to take the values that are white on one, and if the values are white on the other, then they're going to stay white. If the values are white on one and black on the other, then the values would be 0. For grayscale, it's literally just multiplying the values together. So it's going to be something less than 1, and it's going to kind of cut down on the gunk a little bit for us. We're also going to change that to TriPlanar. Okay, great. We need to give it a tiny bit of height. We'll give it a lot of height, just so you can kind of see how the height map drives things. So that's like way overkill. We're going to want to turn that down, but it's helpful to visualize. Like we've given this really flat looking mesh a bunch of depth really quickly. And I think the base mesh, you can always go over here and you can look at the individual channels. It's helpful to get an idea for what's happening. But if you look at the base mesh, it's pretty bright. I actually think I want the blue part to be a little more rough too. And as a result of that, we're going to actually have the gunk roughness be like kind of like shiny. So it really sticks out. So the actual maps have a pretty high, we should name these, the controller materials have a pretty high roughness, and the gunk has a pretty low roughness. Cool. And if you pan the light back and forth, which you've probably seen me do, that's just shift right click. It's really helpful to get like a feel for how it's actually starting to look. Since you don't know what the lighting conditions are going to look like in your game, it's a good idea to just always be kind of panning the light around. But you can really start seeing how the roughness drives that. Okay. Now, there's one more really helpful little thing you can do, and that is you can use the library of smart materials built in. So you can also make your own. But before we do that, we're going to put all of these in a folder by clicking them, clicking a folder, dragging them into the folder. And we're going to close that up and hide it because we want to look at other things right now. So let's say I hate that and I want to use something that's like built in. They have like 200 or 300 materials that you can use as a foundation. It's very helpful to take a material they already have and start tweaking it until it looks a little bit closer to what you're looking for. So we can do something like this, like dirty plastic, and we can just go down and we can change the default color from that like blue to like white. So it looks more like the actual TigerDev logo. And we're still getting all these little extra details that the smart material has built in. And we're good to go. These are also incredibly helpful to look at for references for techniques because there's hundreds of different ways that you can build a material, but odds are like if you need to make like a concrete, you can look at how they did their concrete and kind of get a rough idea of how you could approach it. And I promise over time, it'll start making more sense. The reason why you can just take these materials and slap them on our controller is because we actually baked all of these mesh maps. That allows us to look at things like you can have like crevices and stuff drive how parts of the material are actually being generated. So for example, if I get something bright red, just so I can see what's happening, I put a mask on it and I use like a dirt selector. Because of how we baked the map, it's going to start putting where it thinks dirt should be on a model. And if we were to copy paste this from one file to another, then it would be putting the dirt on that model where it thinks the dirt would be. And as primarily like solo and small developers, this is really helpful because while we can probably make like one nice looking material, we definitely don't have time to make like 40. So you make this one material, you put it in a folder, like our TigerDev one. You right click, create smart material. And now, just like when I was searching over here for plastic, if I search for TigerDev controller, we have it and we can now apply it to all our future models. You probably don't want it to look like a transformer, but you have that option. Okay, so this has been all fine and dandy, but how do we actually take this and put it in Unity? First, just Control S and save it. And then you can go to export textures. We already have the Unity render pipeline selected. I'm actually using the universal render pipeline for the Unity project that I'm about to throw it into. So I'll change it to that. And I will hit export. Pop open Unity. I'm going to want to drag and drop my low poly TigerDev mesh. I don't want the one that's 1,000,000 polygons. And then I can take my texture, which by default is going to be in some weird Adobe folder, probably Adobe Substance Painter. Yeah, here we have it. So if you've used Unity, they use they don't have those 5 individual maps we talked about. They actually combine them all into what's called a mask map that has your metallic data, your ambient occlusion, your roughness, and it also has your base color and you have your normal map. That's a lot to keep track of. So Substance Painter is going to do that all automatically for you. And then you can go and you can create your new material. Take it a logo. And then we drag our base map into base map, our metallic smoothness map into our metallic smoothness slot, our normal map into our normal slot. Unity is really quirky and you have to actually change the texture to normal over here. But once you do that, and you drag your model in, drag your material on your model, it's actually 5 parts, so we're going to reassign it here. Bam. It looks exactly how it did in Substance Painter. Now you could take this and you could export it for Unreal, good to go. You could export it for Blender and render it out over a long, painful series of hours, good to go. You're going to see the same little details that we saw for the height map if you change, or for how the roughness and the height affects it when you pan the light around. So you can see what I'm talking about. So hopefully you can start to see how this is a really kind of important way that you can add depth to your game. It's going to entirely depend on like the scope of what you're creating, whether or not you need to do it like this. But I mean, it's already in terms of having like a normal map and stuff, it's already looking pretty similar to how things off the asset store might. I think the last sort of advanced trick I want to show, this is something that's really just more game dev focused. It doesn't really make a lot of sense for VFX. You can add, if you've written your own shader or you're doing something really like crazy, like you want, you have like gameplay logic that wants to determine if a player's stepping on a certain spot, you can actually add your own maps to Substance to generate, where is that? Right here, texture settings. You can add extra channels that can do stuff that you're going to actually use in your engine or with your gameplay or with your shader. So all you do is you go to add a new channel and you name it something. We could use it for like, I don't know. Unity has a slot for emissive stuff. So you could create a new channel and name it something like emissive. And it's not going to actually do anything inside Substance. Well, that's a fill layer. I want a paint layer. It's not going to show up on the model as a special channel or anything like that. But while you're painting your other data, like if you're painting your color data and you also want the parts of the model that are green to like shock the player, well, you need to write your own gameplay logic to do that. You'd have to generate collisions from the texture map or something like that. But if we go and look at, we named it emissive. You can see that custom channel is now painted along with our height data. So I know that was a lot, but hopefully this kind of illustrates how you can incorporate Substance Painter into your existing game asset workflow. And even if you may not have the time to create a large number of assets, if you have a couple of like key hero props for your game, it's definitely worth the time to actually import those, bake your mesh, and then scribble on all your little details and everything that you'd want to add for your mesh. So I think that's everything. If anyone has any questions, yes?
So I got a question about low resolution textures.
Yes.
So are you able to do like, I won't say pixel art textures, but very like low resolution?
Yeah, so you can adjust the resolution to whatever you'd want it to be. I think by default, they're going to filter it with what's the really ugly, not nearest neighbor filtering, like linear, I guess. I don't know.
Like bilinear, trilinear filtering. Yeah.
Right. If specifically you're trying to do pixel art, there is like you can do post-processing to take what you have and generate pixel art from it, which is what we did for Drillbit, where we were painting our normals and our base color in Substance Painter, but we were generating pixel art from those normals and from those. If you're interested in that, I can send you the, it's like you have to import it like how we did with the Hector texture, but there's like a post-processing filter I have that does specifically that.
For example, if you put in like a Hector, like could you draw directly on it?
Yeah.
And like it'd be, I'm assuming it wouldn't be as low resolution as the original Hector, but like you can just draw on it like.
Yeah, I mean, you can just import anything that's imported as a layer is going to act exactly like anything else. So you can apply filters to it. You can draw directly on it. You can layer extra things. You can write and use procedural fills with that so that you can reuse your stuff.
Are you able to draw on both views, like one that's the UV and then one that's like
Yes. Hold on, I should have picked a different color.
It's like, that's the thing that I hate about making textures for models is that I will find some freaking triangle somewhere that like I either didn't paint or it like bleeds into another section of the unit that it just looks up.
Yeah,
So,
it's very helpful, especially if your UVs make sense to be able to paint, like especially decals and stuff when we're trying to put the hector. It's really helpful to have that UV view. Similarly, I cannot overstate how helpful the triplanar projection is for sloppy UVs. You can totally butcher your UVs. And as long as you're using a triplanar projection,
so you said your UVs make sense.
yeah. So you can totally like screw that up and you can still, you're not going to be getting bad seams or anything like that. It's going to be evenly projecting. That tends to not work as well for like very smooth things because it's like a box-based projection. But they have other projections for stuff like that, like sphere and cylindrical projection. Sphere makes no sense for a controller. But there's a bunch of different like tools that they give you that you can help kind of compensate for, you know, like rushed like issues you might have with your model. I still advise making your UVs correctly and making your models correctly, but it can be helpful. All right, any other questions? Cool. All right, thanks everyone for coming out.